Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. This is What's Left. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson, and for the next close to half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think are important enough for you to pay some attention to. So if you have any reactions to the show, comments, questions, whatever, email them to me directly. This is my personal email here, whoviating@aol.com. If you didn't catch that, you can go to my website. It's called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be around here a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you didn't run out and get paper and pencil to write it down, or you can leave a comment there if you'd like. If you do send me email, just two things as always. Please remember to include something in the subject line that will make it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I stink at answering email. All right, with that, let's get to it. I always like to start with some good news, and I do have some bits of good news this week. The first actually comes from somewhere that has been, and I fear will continue to be, not really a common source of good news. And that's the Supreme Court of the United States. The case involves a family outside Denver who had a child with a learning disability. He attended public school from kindergarten through fourth grade, during which time he was given some specialized instruction to deal with his learning behavioral issues. But his parents then placed him in a private academy, specifically dealing with autism, because they were frustrated with the fact that his progress had just stalled. There, at this special school, his behavior and his learning improved markedly. So the parents then sued the school for reimbursement for the costs of the tuition of the specialized education, arguing that the school had not met its obligations under the law to provide a, quote, free appropriate public education for children with disabilities. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals said no. It found that the school must offer, and this is a quote, merely more than de minimis to meet its obligations. That is, all the school had to do was to offer something beyond the absolute bare minimum. The good news here is that on March 22nd, a unanimous Supreme Court said that's not good enough. That children with disabilities have a right to, and there are some quotes here, an educational program that is reasonably calculated to enable them to make progress, and one which must be appropriately ambitious in the light of the child's capabilities. To do otherwise, to be satisfied with the standard of merely more than de minimis, to aim so low, the court said, is tantamount to sitting idly by awaiting the time when students with disabilities are old enough to drop out. Now, in response to this, some people claimed that it would cost too much to do this. Well, I say if we can find an extra $54 billion to kill people, we can find a fraction of that amount to help them learn. All right, another bit of good news comes again, oddly enough, from the Supreme Court. Figured it must be spring is in the air and everyone's giddy. Well, on March 28th, the Supreme Court ruled that Texas, a state inordinately fond of the death penalty, used an obsolete standard in determining whether a defendant has the intellectual capability such that they can be executed. The case is out of Bobby Moore, who's 57. He was convicted 37 years ago of fatally shooting a grocery store clerk during a robbery. Now, the Supreme Court had ruled back in 2002 that the execution of people who are intellectually disabled violates the Constitution's protection against unusual and cruel punishment. In this case, the justices ruled 5-3 that Texas's system for assessing the intellect of defendants is deficient and not based on medical expertise. The case was sent back to lower courts for a reassessment of Moore's mental capacity. Now, the victory here may be temporary. The fact is, Moore could still be found to be intellectually capable of being killed on rehearing. But personally, I think anything that throws any kind of rock into the machinery of the death penalty is good news. All right, one more bit of good news for you. Resistance grows and spreads. On March 26th, in the biggest show of defiance in 5 years, public opposition to corruption and rigged elections saw tens of thousands of people turn out in scores of demonstrations all across Russia. Almost all of those rallies were unsanctioned, meaning that they had neither permission nor permits, But still, people poured into the streets in cities from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg. The biggest rally was, not surprisingly, in Moscow. Police estimated that 7,000 to 8,000 people took part there, with another 3,000 in St. Petersburg, and crowds of hundreds or more in many other places. Now, it has to be said, though, that when you consider photos of the events, these are of Moscow and of St. Petersburg, it seems clear that those police estimates are woefully low, and the opposition estimates of 20,000 in Moscow and 10,000 in St. Petersburg are very likely closer to the mark. Nationwide, over 1,000 people were arrested, again, most of them in Moscow. Now, the demonstrations arise from a call by anti-corruption campaigner Alexei Navalny, who has been described as a complex and charismatic figure who has long been a thorn in the Kremlin's side. He's lost some support among Russia's liberal Democrats because of his anti-immigrant rhetoric and the fact that he has participated in demonstrations staged by neo-Nazis and white supremacists. But he is highly popular among Russians who are critical of corruption in the Kremlin. And by the way, as a quick footnote to all that, it wouldn't be filed under Same As It Ever Was, or if you prefer, Mirror Mirror. When RT, which is a Russian state government-owned news outlet, when it reported on the demonstrations, the first comment in the discussion was, and I'm quoting, "Soros and the U.S. have been busy then." And yes, they did mean George Soros. Many other comments were along the lines of, Soros is behind it all, the protesters are a small minority, Navalny is a CIA stooge, and the protesters were paid. Made me feel right at home. All right, on the other hand, we also have some not good news, news which proves that even as movements gather strength, there will always be setbacks. In this case, the movement is the Fight for 15, the movement for a livable minimum wage. And the setback came on March 24th, when Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh vetoed legislation which would have raised the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour. Although the city council could override the ban, that's considered unlikely. Pugh made the same claims that opponents of wage increases always make, that it would damage the economy, that it would cost jobs, that it would drive out businesses, and the fact is, no matter how many times those same claims are made, and no matter how many times they prove to be untrue, no matter how many times cities have actually raised their minimum wage, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle are three recent examples of raising the minimum wage without doing any harm to the local economy. No matter how many times that happens, the same arguments get raised. Pugh, in fact, said the cities and towns of Maryland should wait for the state of Maryland to act. And of course, just as cities claim that if they raise their minimum wage, they will lose business to surrounding towns, the states claim if they raise their minimum wage, they'll lose business to other states. And so the buck gets passed up to the feds, who just do nothing, even as the actual buying power of the federal minimum wage sits below where it was in 1969. And the millions of adults who are paid minimum or low wages continue to lose ground because we dare not offend business. And speaking of the minimum wage, it provides another example of what I keep telling you. The right-wing attitude is that if you lose under the rules, then you get to change the rules. In November, voters in 4 states approved referendums raising the minimum wage in those respective states. That's excellent news for low-wage workers in the states and for those state economies. But in 3 of those states, Arizona, Maine, and Washington, corporations have been using the courts and their influence in state legislatures in an effort to undo what the voters did. In one case, that of Arizona, they've already lost. On March 14th, the Arizona Supreme Court unanimously rejected a suit by a group of business groups that were trying to have the November victory overturned. Arizona is also the state, by the way, as I mentioned last week in last show, in responding to victories by citizen initiatives, is now trying to make it almost impossible for any such initiative ever to get in the ballot. Meanwhile, a corporate lawsuit in Washington about the minimum wage is still pending, with the first hearing set for April 3rd. And in Maine, the state legislature, lobbied heavily by the Restaurant Association, is setting about changing that state's new minimum wage law in a way to benefit the industry by reinstating the tip credit, under which tips can be counted towards the minimum wage requirement. Now, as part of last fall's referendum raising the minimum wage in Maine, the public voted to have that credit phased out starting in 2018. But that's not what the corporations want, and the legislature in Maine may well be prepared to do their bidding. Because that's what the focus is for them. That's what you have to realize. That's the deal for them. That's the deal for these corporations. That's the whole game for them. A little more profit, a few more bucks, maybe especially if those bucks can be squeezed out of your lowest paid workers, your most economically desperate workers, your socially and politically weakest workers, the ones who are going to go along and put up with whatever you put them through because they need the work. I said it a year and a half ago. The pursuit of profit is the baseline cause of economic injustice. It is the baseline cause of income inequality, the baseline cause of poverty, the baseline cause of homelessness, the baseline cause of hunger. Now, the pursuit of profit does not allow for the common good. It does not allow for the benefit of the community as a whole. It does not allow for the famous quote, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one." In fact, the pursuit of profit declares the opposite. Not even the needs, but the desires of the one outweigh the needs of all the rest, because that is the way they think. That is what the corporate elite, the 1%, the economic powers of our nation, the masters of the universe, however you care to refer to them, that's how they think. They hold that not only is profit is its own reward, profit is its own justification. And everything else, including ethics and the law, must fall before it. They do not care about you. They never have, they never will. You are just a tool for their gain, a means for their end. Now, the thing is, I need to make clear, profit itself is not in and of itself evil. Recall that the quote from the Bible is not money is the root of all evil, it's the love of money is the root of all evil. And in here, profit itself is not the root of inequality, poverty, and hunger, but the pursuit of profit, or making profit is the goal. That is the root of inequality, poverty, and hunger. It is destructive. It is evil. Consider the example of the so-called New Detroit. That's a nickname that Alabama has been trying on since 1997, when a Mercedes-Benz assembly line opened near Tuscaloosa, followed by Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai opening plants in Alabama as well. With them came auto parts manufacturers. Alabama's burgeoning auto parts industry now employs 26,000 workers who in 2016 earned $1.3 billion in wages. This seemed like the relief that the nation's fifth poorest state had been dreaming of. But Bloomberg News recently looked at records of OSHA, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, looked at the records of the agency which told the human cost involved. These companies, these parts companies in particular, would make promises of deliveries that were impossible for them to meet, and then demanded the employees make good on those promises, forcing them to work insanely long hours, up to like 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week for months on end. Sometimes demanding that they work on dangerous machinery for which they had no training, in utter disregard of their safety and welfare. Hourly pay is low, turnover is high, and safety is an afterthought. In fact, safety violations often were ignored because it was cheaper to ignore the warnings and ultimately pay the fine than it was to fix the problem. As a result, quoting the article, OSHA records document burning flesh, crushed limbs, dismembered body parts, and a flailing fall into a vat of acid. The files read like Upton Sinclair or even Dickens. Adam Wolfsberger, a former manager at a temp agency that supplied workers to one of those parts manufacturers, said that the companies treated people like interchangeable parts, which is to be expected because that's all they are to you. That's all you are to the bosses. You are interchangeable parts. We are in a national economy where inequality has grown steadily over the past 4 presidents, in fact, since the 1970s. We're in a national economy where after 8 years of supposed recovery, poverty is still higher than it was in 2009, and in fact is higher than almost any individual year since 1981. We are in a national economy where the typical CEO makes 276 times as much as the typical worker. As recently as 1965, it was only 20 times as much. And believe it or not, that 276 times, that's an improvement. Around the year 2000, it was around 376 times. We are in a national economy where real median household income has gone up just 5.5% since 1989. And we live in a world economy where just 8 men own as much wealth as half the world's population. And even that is increasingly concentrated. As recently as 2010, it took 43 of the richest to equal half the world's population. These people do not care about you. They never have, they never will. All they care about is more. And they do not care about the price that you will have to pay for them to get it. We are on our own, and we have to stand up for ourselves. Take a break. And we're back. All that talk about profit and the corrosive effect of chasing profit leads us right into one of our regular features. This is the outrage of the week. All right, here's a thought. Do you really think that TheRump's destruction of programs aimed at limiting or even measuring climate change is about climate or science? I mean, of course not. Of course it isn't, any more than it's about jobs. It's about profit. It's about fossil fuel corporation profit. It's about the pursuit of profit, overwhelming, driving out all other considerations, even to the future of the planet. Upton Sinclair once wrote that, and I'm quoting, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." And for some in the fossil fuel industry, perhaps maybe especially true for the coal miners who fear that their jobs will evaporate and their communities along with them, that may be true. But in considering the higher-ups, the corporate gods, C.S. Lewis's quiet men in white collars with cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who work in clean, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices and do not need to raise their voices, for those people, Sinclair was much too polite because they do know and they have known. Shell Oil knew of the dangers of global climate change by 1986. They even produced a video about it in 1991. Mobil at the time, knew about the risks no later than 1981. Not only did they do nothing about it, the corporation actively funded the natty-natty naysayers on climate change for the next 27 years. They knew, and they know, and they don't care. Because caring would mean caring about something other than profit. And it's that profit that TheRump is serving. His executive order, issued on March 28th, aims to undermine and roll back every move the executive branch has made or even proposed to make about climate change over the past several years. It intends to demolish a wide array of Obama-era policies on global warming, including emission rules for power plants, limits on methane leaks, a moratorium on federal coal leasing, the use of social cost of carbon to guide federal decisions, and any and all regulations that burden the production of coal, oil, gas, or nuclear power. He is even rescinding an order directing federal agencies to help local communities strengthen their ability to deal with the impacts of climate change. The whole thing is so nonsensically extreme that not only has information on climate change been scrubbed from the White House website, but the Energy Department's Office of International Climate and Clean Energy has banned the use of the terms climate change, emissions reduction, and Paris Agreement from all written communication. And Michael Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget, went so far as to say at a press briefing about TheRump's budget proposal that, quote, "We're not spending money on climate research anymore. We consider that to be a waste of money." It is wholesale, deliberate, conscious rejection, not only of facts, not only of science, but a rejection of knowledge itself. It is, in other words, a wholesale, deliberate, conscious abandonment of our collective future to satisfy the present-day desires for profit in the fossil fuel industry. So yes, the pursuit of profit, when profit becomes the goal, not the means, becomes the point, not the tool, yes, it is evil and it is destructive. And it is now promoting the destruction of our environment now and into the future. And that, most certainly, is an outrage. All right, next up, one of our occasional features. It's called For the Record. And this is where we just mention some things quickly, just a couple of sentences, just to make sure it actually gets mentioned. All right, first off, for the record, leaked documents showed that Daniel Pantaleo, the New York cop who killed Eric Garner with the band Chokehold in July 2014, he should have been fired long before that incident happened. Before he choked Garner to death over a claim of selling untaxed cigarettes, Pantaleo had 7 disciplinary complaints lodged against him, plus 4 individual complaints that had been substantiated by an independent review board. None of these complaints, none of these incidents led to any significant punishment. Next up, for the record, a couple of computer geeks have set up a website called MakeTweetsGreatAgain, where people can sign up to donate anywhere from 10 cents up to the ACLU every time Donald TheRump issues a tweet. So far, last time I checked, over $1,000 had been donated to the ACLU this way, and they also let him know via Twitter how much each of his tweets is worth. Finally, for the record, the annual African Global Economic and Development Summit, which is about trade between the U.S. and African nations, was held in Los Angeles on March 16th to 18th. One thing was missing: Africans. Every one of the invited delegates from Africa, about 100 of them, have been denied a visa. All right, next up we have this is one of our occasional features. This is the Hero Award. It's something we give out as the occasion arises to someone who just did the right thing on a matter big or small. Now, earlier in the show, I said I regarded any obstruction thrown into the machinery of the death penalty to be good news, so this Hero Award certainly qualifies. Our hero is Aramis, I'm going to make sure I pronounce her name right, Ayala. Aramis Ayala, the state attorney for Orange Osceola counties in Florida. On March 16th, she announced that her office will no longer seek the death penalty as a sentence in any case in which her office is involved. Ayala, the first African-American in Florida history to be elected a prosecutor, said the death penalty provides no safety benefits to the public or law enforcement, is not a deterrent, winds up costing more than life in prison, and gives victims' families false hope for closure, among other reasons. Bear in mind that Florida is home to the death-loving Stand Your Ground laws and has as a governor Rick Scott, the secret identity of Voldemort. Florida loves death almost as much as Texas does. So it should not be surprised that reaction from a Florida officialdom was swift and hostile. Governor Baltimore pulled her off the case and assigned someone else, and the judge in the case was so eager to get the possible killing started that he would not even delay the case until Ayala could get a ruling on her claim that Baltimore did not have the legal authority to remove her. What's more, the Goppers in the Florida state legislature, who dominate the state legislature, now propose to cut her office's budget by somewhere between $1.3 and $1.4 million and eliminate 21 staff positions, all because she dared to exercise her prosecutorial authority in a manner less bloodthirsty than they would prefer. How this will play out remains to be seen. What is clear is that Aramis Ayala has chosen the correct side of justice and history and pointed out, even if unintentionally, how the death penalty is not about justice, it's about bloody vengeance. And for that, she is a hero. Finally, for the week, it's our other regular feature. This is the Clown Award, given as always for acts of meritorious stupidity. Now, you got to understand that sometimes the Clown Award is given for something that's outrageous or creepy or, just plain downright stupid. But sometimes it's given out just because of something that makes you go, duh. With that in mind, the winner of the Big Red Nose this week is a majority of American men. According to a new survey by the nonpartisan polling firm Perry Undum, the majority of Americans, both men and women, hold fairly progressive views on reproductive rights. For example, 74% of voters do not want to defund Planned Parenthood. 63% oppose restricting access to abortion care. 83% want to keep the Medicaid expansion intact. And 75% think that if men were the ones who got pregnant, Congress would keep the birth control benefit in health care instead of talking about getting rid of it. So why the Clown Award? Because of one particular question that got results that really just struck me as shake your head weird. The question, asked, have you benefited personally from any woman in your life having access to affordable birth control? 52% of men said no. Guys, what? You haven't benefited? You haven't benefited from not having an unwanted pregnancy in your marriage or your relationship? You haven't benefited personally from not having an unwanted child in your marriage or relationship? You haven't, how should I say this? You haven't benefited personally from having the fear of an unwanted pregnancy removed from, let's call it, a potential relationship? Dudes, get a clue. On just about everything else in the survey, you proved yourselves progressive, much more progressive than Americans are generally thought to be. But on this one, that failure to connect these bright yellow numbered dots left you looking like, I'm sorry guys, it left you looking like clowns. All right, that's it for this week. We are out of here. As always, we welcome any comments, reactions. Some things I really, really want to get to in the coming weeks. There are two big things I want to get to. Hopefully, I will manage to do that. But for now, as always, you just have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week. And for now, as always, peace.